In the mid-1940s, the night sky over Germany became a graveyard for the Royal Air Force. Thousands of feet above the earth, inside the cramped, freezing fuselages of Lancaster and Halifax bombers, crews felt a false sense of security. They believed the darkness was their armor. They had been told that as long as they stayed in formation and their tail-end Charlies, the rear gunners, kept their eyes peeled, they were safe. But then, the impossible started happening. Bombers began to explode without warning. There were no dogfights, no tracer rounds arcing through the air, and no sightings of enemy aircraft. A plane would simply erupt in flames, its wings shearing off, or its fuel tanks detonating in a blinding flash. To the horrified survivors in nearby planes, it looked as though the hand of God had simply reached out and struck them down. The crews called it the Scarecrow, a theory that the Germans were firing special shells that mimicked a disintegrating bomber to scare them off. They refused to believe that an enemy fighter could be that accurate, that deadly, and that completely invisible. The British intelligence officers were baffled. Their bombers were bristling with machine guns, turrets on the tail, the nose, and the top. They had created a sphere of fire around the aircraft. The only place a German fighter could approach without being seen was from directly below, where the bomber's own belly blocked the gunner's view. But to shoot from there, a German pilot would have to pull his nose up, stall his plane, and fire while losing speed, a suicidal maneuver in the middle of a massive bomber stream. What the Allies didn't realize was that the Luftwaffe had stopped playing by the rules of aerial combat. They weren't trying to dogfight anymore. They had developed a lethal cheat code for the sky. While the RAF gunners were staring into the dark horizons, looking for the silhouette of a wing or the glow of an exhaust, the German hunters were sitting mere meters directly beneath them, staring straight up through their cockpit glass. This was the birth of Schrge Musik, translated literally as slanted music, but to the Allied airmen, it would become known as the most terrifying secret of the air war.
Traditional aerial combat had always been a game of predatory chase, a high-speed dance where the hunter followed the hunted. But by 1941, the German night hunters were finding that this dance was becoming a suicide mission. Every time a Messerschmitt approached a British heavy bomber from the rear, it was met by a terrifying wall of lead from the quadruple-mounted machine guns in the tail turrets. The RAF had systematically turned their Lancaster and Halifax bombers into flying fortresses, engineering a sphere of fire designed to shred anything that dared to sit on their tail. The sky was a web of tracers, and for the German pilots, the traditional approach was becoming a graveyard. But in the desperate, freezing darkness of the night raids, a few elite pilots began to notice a glaring, fatal flaw in the Allied design, a mistake born of British confidence. They realized that while the Allied bombers could fire up, out, and behind, they were effectively oblivious to the world directly beneath their feet. In a frantic bid to save weight and maximize fuel for the long trek to Berlin, the British Air Ministry had made a calculated gamble. They had removed the belly turrets. This left a massive, unprotected void, a dead zone that stretched the entire length of the aircraft's floorboards. It was a revelation that changed the geometry of the air war. From this specific position, a German fighter wasn't just a threat, it was a ghost. The German pilot could slide his aircraft into the cold slipstream just meters below the enemy's fuselage, matching their speed and course in total, eerie safety. They were tucked into a pocket of absolute darkness, a sanctuary where no British gunner could ever see them and no machine gun could ever reach them. The aha moment was chilling in its simplicity. The German hunters realized that the safest place in the entire sky, the one place you were guaranteed not to be shot down, was directly in the shadow of the enemy's belly. It was the ultimate predator's logic. The closer you were to the prey, the safer you became. But this discovery presented a frustrating mechanical paradox. To exploit this weakness, a pilot would traditionally have to pull his nose up and stall his plane, making him a sitting duck. They realized they had to stop playing by the rules of traditional dogfighting altogether. They needed to stop thinking like pilots and start thinking like snipers. The target wasn't the plane, it was the vulnerable, fuel-heavy wing root viewed from a vertical angle. The realization was clear. If you could find a way to fire straight up while flying straight ahead, the Allied bomber stream wouldn't just be a target, it would be a slaughterhouse. This was no longer a dogfight, it was an execution waiting for a weapon.
While the strategy was brilliant, the execution required a masterpiece of engineering. This wasn't just about sticking guns in a plane, it was about reinventing how an aircraft functioned as a weapon. The heart of the Schrge Musik system was usually a pair of 20mm MG-151 cannons, but as the war progressed, the Germans upscaled to the terrifying 30mm Mk-108. This weapon was known as the Pneumatic Hammer. It was short, ugly, and prone to jamming, but it fired an explosive shell so powerful that just 3 or 4 hits could tear a heavy bomber's wing clean off. To make this work, German engineers had to solve a nightmare of physics. Because the guns were mounted behind the pilot, the muzzle flashes could easily blind him in the pitch-black night. They developed specialized flash hiders and used glare shields to protect the pilot's night vision. Even more crucial was the ammunition. The Germans realized that tracer rounds, the glowing bullets used in almost every other dogfight, were their worst enemy. If a pilot used tracers, the British crew would see the stream of fire coming from below and dive away. By using dark ammunition with no tracers, the German hunters remained invisible even while they were pulling the trigger. The most incredible piece of technology, however, was the Revi 16N reflector sight. Bolted directly to the roof of the canopy, it allowed the pilot to aim with surgical precision while flying level. This created a zero-deflection shot. In a normal dogfight, you have to aim ahead of a moving target. But because the German fighter was flying at the exact same speed and direction as the bomber, the target appeared perfectly still in the upward sight. It was like shooting a stationary target at point-blank range. The British were slowly realizing something was wrong, but they were trapped by their own airframe. The Lancaster, the massive beam of metal that held the wings together, ran right through the middle of the floor. There was physically no room to install a turret to fire back down. The Allies were flying in a technological trap, and the Germans were now producing these vertical killers by the hundreds. The music wasn't just playing, it was reaching a deadly crescendo. The devastating peak of the Slanted music came on the night of March 30th, 1944. The target was Nuremberg. Over 700 British bombers flew into a moonlit sky, unaware they were headed into the most efficient killing in aerial history. The German night fighters didn't just engage the stream, they dismantled it. Using their upward-firing cannons, they moved from one bomber to the next. For the crews who made it back, the terror was absolute. They spoke of the scarecrows, bombers that seemed to spontaneously combust without a single tracer being fired. But no secret stays buried forever. By the summer of 1944, the Allies finally captured a functional Ju-88 night fighter that had landed in England by mistake. British intelligence officers were horrified to find the vertical cannons hidden behind the cockpit. The mystery was solved, but the solution came too late for thousands of airmen. The Allies began a desperate race to retrofit their bombers, installing fish pond radar to look beneath the aircraft and adding belly stinger machine guns. However, the real end for Schrge Musik didn't come from a counterweapon, it came from the collapse of the Third Reich itself. As Allied armies squeezed Germany from both sides, fuel for the night fighters ran dry. The elite pilots were grounded, and the musical cannons fell silent in their hangars. Today, these weapon systems are mere curiosities in museums, but their legacy lives on in every modern fighter jet that can strike a target it isn't even pointing at. The air war had started with knights in dogfights, but it ended in the shadows, proving that in the sky, what you don't see is exactly what kills you.